The next item on the order paper is a motion on onshore petroleum licensing and drilling. I ask the clerk to please read the motion.
That this Assembly recognises the moratoria in various forms on fracking in England, Scotland and Wales and the ban on fracking in the Republic of Ireland. Notes that this motion builds on the 2015 Strategic Planning Policy Statement presumption against the exploitation of unconventional hydrocarbon extraction in Northern Ireland, acknowledges its responsibility to protect public health and the environment, and calls on the Executive to investigate an immediate moratorium on petroleum licensing for all exploration for, drilling for and extraction of hydrocarbons until legislation is brought forward that bans all exploration for, drilling for and extraction of hydrocarbons in Northern Ireland.
Thank you. I call Ms Rachel Woods to move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour and 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind, and all other speakers will have 5 minutes. I call Ms Rachel Woods.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And from the outset, my sincere thanks must go to the groups and campaigners who have worked tirelessly on this, without whom we would not be standing here today. Non-exhaustively, to stop the drill, Lamp Fermanagh Fracking Awareness Network, Protect Our North Coast, Belcoo Frack Free, Friends of Woodburn Forest, Ballinlee Residents Groups, Love Leitrim, Safety Before LNG, Friends of the Earth and Farmers for Action. This is not the voice of one constituent, this is the voice of thousands, all saying that we must not start an onshore petroleum production industry here, and we need to legislate for the cessation of licensing for exploration and extraction. I wish to thank members who signed this motion, as we attempted to achieve consensus across the Chamber, and to Sinn Féin for bringing it to be heard so soon after it was tabled. It was and is vital that this is debated now. It is disappointing that not every party could sign up to it, which would have sent out a very powerful message, but it was not to be. Hydrocarbon extraction in all its different guises and names is a process by which fossil fuels are extracted from under the ground. Processes that we do not wish to have in Northern Ireland, nor do we wish to continue with any drilling of exploratory wells. We're not talking about one well here, though. We're talking about potentially thousands, under licence by this Executive to fundamentally destroy our landscape, our communities and our environment. In 2014, Tamboran, one of the companies that has a petroleum licence currently in for consideration in our Economy Department, stated that it was undertaking work it is required to do under the terms of licence for a government, and it intends to meet its obligations in full. They had said they believe that people have the right to know whether gas is present, suggesting potential benefits that this can have in terms of investment, jobs and, bizarrely, quoting energy security. This is and was an argument full of holes. It was also an argument made before by the previous Eddy Minister, Arlene Foster, when she said, "I firmly believe that Northern Ireland needs to explore the potential that shale gas offers, providing a valuable opportunity for increasing the security of energy supply." Members, beware of chasing the carrot being dangled in front of your nose. This is nothing more than a false promise. Drilling for fossil fuels is not the way to achieve energy security. Renewables are. And it is a practice that we will never come close to meeting our Paris commitments, the need for divestment, let alone deal with the climate emergency, or indeed the elusive NDNA commitments. Licences of any kind granted to companies will not create the kind of jobs for the future that people of NI need. And we've seen in the US, job creation from drilling claims are overstated and short-term. We all know and have debated recently the importance of well-paid, long-term jobs for people in Northern Ireland. Drilling operations will not supply them. According to AMEC, only 17% of the jobs at Quadrilla's Lancashire site went to local people, but these were mainly for non-specialist and therefore non-highly paid sectors. If we want both energy security and sustainable jobs in NI, we need to focus on renewable energy. Jobs in the renewable sectors create over 6 times as many jobs as gas per unit of power generated or saved, and around 3 times as many jobs for the same investment. I will.
The member speaks of ensuring that there is local benefit. Would the member have any comment, in light of her lauding of renewable energy, on the audit report of yesterday, which demonstrated that the big financial winners were financial institutions subsidised by local funds from local consumers into their coffers, courtesy of the renewable energy scheme?
Thank the member for his intervention, and I do, but renewable sector will work when it's administered properly. And if we want both energy security and jobs for Northern Ireland, we'll need the same investment in renewable energy, and projecting forward to 2030, we need double the renewables capacity to meet a 70% renewable energy target. These would be sustainable jobs with upskilling through our technical colleges, schools and universities. And I've mentioned before the opportunity for retrofitting, focus on green energy and the avenues that it opens up as part of our just transition to a low-carbon economy. We've all been told in the last few months to listen to the science on public health, and we have taken heed. And as policymakers, legislators and elected reps, we should always strive for safe, happy and healthy communities. Hydrocarbon extraction is not the way to achieve this. Exploration and extraction is bad for public health. The drilling and fracturing processes used to extract use a range of chemicals that are harmful to health, while mobilising toxic and radioactive substances that naturally occur in shale rock and coal. A 2016 Yale study found that one of the 1,117 water pollutants and 143 air pollutants found in fracking fluids and wastewater assessed, 55 could be classed as known, probable or possible human carcinogens. All members will have received a briefing from Dr. O'Dolan, and I hope that you have read it. Airborne chemicals can leak from pipes, wellheads and other infrastructure. We have to look at radon and its presence there in Fermanagh. There is no evidence that fracking can operate without threatening public health directly. Friends of the Earth have shown that the industry brings with it wider changes that can detrimentally impact health around well pads. Workers, nearby residents are exposed to continuous noise from drilling, flaring and compressor stations. Exposure to noise pollution is linked to cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairment and sleep disturbance, not to mention impacts on air quality and pollution. There are concerns around mental health and well-being of people living close to gas operations. A large part of the reason of why fracking was banned in New York State was that there were significant gaps in the knowledge of potential public health impacts, and that all the potential impacts had not been adequately studied. I don't have time today to go into the impacts on tourism that thousands of wells could have, but it should be obvious. Fermanagh alone boasts many nature reserves, many areas of special scientific interest, and not to mention the Marble Arch Caves. All that could be put at risk. As the motion states, hydraulic fracturing has been legislated against in the Republic of Ireland since 2017. The Welsh Government has confirmed that they would not be undertaking any new licensing, and in Scotland the Government's position is that it would not support the development of unconventional oil and gas. In 2019, fracking was halted by the Government in England. Andrea Leadsom, the previous Business and Energy Secretary, said the Government had always been clear that shale gas exploration in the UK must be carried out safely, but concluded that future unacceptable impacts on the local community couldn't be ruled out, and a moratorium on fracking in England was put in. It is time for Northern Ireland to follow suit with more than a presumption. The industry cannot be regulated safely. There is nothing unique about Northern Ireland that would exempt us from the fate of other fracked communities or communities suffering the dirty effects of coal seam gas production. NI is too small to support a gas industry with hundreds of well pads. We simply do not have the space for this type of dangerous industry without threatening people's lives and livelihoods. The entire petroleum licensing regime is flawed. The absence of meaningful consultation under the 1964 Petroleum Act, the failure to uphold rights enshrined in the Aarhus Convention, the absence of strategic environmental impact assessments and the absence of management plans for SACs and other protected areas means there is no ecological baselines for the assessment of environmental impacts with the scientific certainty that is a legal requirement under the Habitats Directive. The Minister for the Economy has claimed yesterday that our laws are seriously out of date. So to finish, Mr Speaker, in the words of the former envoy for climate change to the UK Foreign Office, you can be in favour of fixing the climate or you can be in favour of exploiting shale gas, but you can't be in favour of both at the same time. The Executive must bring legislation to this effect as a matter of urgency. Thank you, and I commend the motion to the House.
Thank you. I call Mr Gary Middleton.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the members for bringing forward this motion, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on it. The Economy Committee earlier this year received a briefing from the Minister and from the Department outlining some of their priorities for the remainder of this mandate and the time going forward. The Minister was very clear at that time that clean energy would be one of those priorities highest on the agenda and highest within the Department. And of course, as an Economy Committee member, it's evident that that has been the case. This is both from a climate change and an economic perspective. We all should be focusing on a clean, green recovery. The Minister continues to champion that clean, green recovery and clean energy as well. All ministers and all departments have responsibility to deliver on those aims. We know that the New Decade New Approach touched on this, and I think it's something which we must continue to put our focus onto as well. I also note that work is continuing at pace to develop a new energy strategy for Northern Ireland, following an earlier call for evidence. 5 working groups have been set up and established on consumers, energy efficiency, heat, power and transport. The groups will provide evidence, and we will carry out analysis, and the Department will carry out analysis of that evidence and inform options for considerations by ministers and the wider executive. An expert panel on the future of energy has also been established to advise on the development and first implementation phase. Through our work on the Economy Committee, we are aware that it is hoped that an options paper on the energy strategy will be published for consultation by the end of March 2021. In the meantime, I very much welcome some of the urgent policy decisions which have already been taken. Particularly, the Minister recently announced that a new 2030 renewable electricity target will be at least 70%. And is also welcome, Principal Deputy Speaker, that the Department is working on a range of projects which will showcase Northern Ireland's potential to develop cutting-edge hydrogen technology here in Northern Ireland as well. Northern Ireland has led the way in developing renewable electricity to meet the Executive's 40% renewables target, with 48% of our power now coming from indigenous renewable sources. This success has helped to support a low-carbon and renewable energy economy made up of 3,500 businesses, 5,400 jobs and over 250,000 of exports. But this is a fraction of the size that it could be. There is a substantial economic recovery opportunity in decarbonising energy, growing the green economy across Northern Ireland and delivering significant export opportunities for homemade, lower and zero carbon solutions. Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. I call Ms Gemma Dolan.
I would like to start my remarks today by quoting 2 individuals who, by their own remarks over the years, care deeply about climate change and the future of our planet. The first is, global warming, climate change, the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats that humanity has ever faced, and one largely of our own creation. The second is, today's ecological crisis, especially climate change, threatens the very future of the human family, and this is no exaggeration. One of those quotes is from Pope Francis and one from Charles Windsor. If they can agree on the threat facing us from climate change, I believe it should be easy for all of us to agree to this motion. Indeed, as evidenced by all who have signed this motion, it is pretty clear that the most of us do recognise the threat posed to us all and the way forward. Hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, oil and gas, whatever term you wish to use, are a clear and present threat to human health, to biodiversity, to humanity itself, and to our planet's very future. One of the simplest answers to this threat is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. We, as an Assembly and a society, must consign oil and gas to the dustbin of history and look to renewable energy today. Focus on renewable energy today and support renewable energy today, not push it into the next mandate or into the next year. The first step in fully supporting renewable energy is in supporting this moratorium on issuing petroleum licences and then on bringing legislation to ban all hydrocarbon exploration and extraction. May I now speak briefly of my own county of Fermanagh. For too long, the threat of fracking has hung over our community in Fermanagh. Multiple studies have linked fracking not only to air and water pollution, soil contamination and the creation of dangerous waste byproducts, but also to several types of cancer, preterm births, high-risk pregnancies, asthma, migraines, fatigue, nasal and sinus symptoms and several skin disorders. All of the people on the ground, of all political persuasions and none, know that the negative impacts of fracking far outweigh the supposed benefits of the oil and gas industry rolling into our area. The farming sector, the larger agri-food sector and the tourism sector are the lifeblood of my county. The long-term damage that will be done to the health of my constituents, coupled with the devastation to the economy and the environment, can never be allowed to happen. In 2014, an oil and gas company rolled into Fermanagh with no prior warning or no community consultation. They threatened local residents in Belcoo with illegal threats. This fracking company went on to take 2 judicial review cases against 2 separate executive ministers. Big oil and gas companies do not have the best interests of our constituents. They do not have respect for our democratic institutions. That is why I urge all parties here today to fully support this motion. Gurma
I call Mr Patsy McClone.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. And as one of the co-signatories to this motion on behalf of the SDLP, I welcome the motion and the debate here today. It's an opportunity for this Assembly to make it clear that the environment can no longer be treated as a second-class consideration. In the continued absence of a climate change bill, it is up to this Assembly to highlight the steps we must take to safeguard the environment for future generations. Because the future is one of a decarbonised energy system, and now is the time to demonstrate our commitment to that greener, cleaner future. It is right that the motion calls for action from the Executive as a whole, because this is a cross-cutting issue that goes beyond the licensing remit of the Department for the Economy. Short-term economic interests cannot be allowed to trump long-term concerns about the impact on public health or on the environment. And, as we know, like some political parties, the companies seeking these licences frequently overpromise and underdeliver. And it shouldn't be just about immediate environmental impact caused by extraction. The long-term impact on our climate of the continued use of hydrocarbons is now centre stage where it should be. That impact must be a major part of our policy decisions. As the motion notes, the 2015 Strategic Planning Policy Statement set out a policy of presumption against the exploitation of unconventional hydrocarbon extraction because of its potential environmental impact. Welcome as that was, it is time for this Assembly to accept the reality of that environmental impact and step beyond the presumption of 2015. The evidence has been considered by administrations across these islands, and they have reached the same conclusion. Onshore extraction of hydrocarbons is not safe. It has a detrimental impact on the local environment, and it undermines efforts to reduce the use of hydrocarbons as an energy source locally and globally. In July 2017, the Irish Government banned the exploration for and extraction of onshore petroleum by means of hydraulic fracking. The Scottish Government introduced a moratorium on onshore unconventional oil and gas extraction in 2015. Last year, they finalised a policy position of no support for unconventional oil and gas extraction in Scotland. The Welsh Government confirmed in December 2018 that they would not support fracking of petroleum in Wales, and significantly, that they would not undertake any new petroleum licensing. In November 2019, the British Government finally accepted the scientific evidence that shale gas exploration couldn't be carried out safely and brought in an immediate moratorium on fracking in England. They have all recognised that regulation of the activities of the companies involved in this practice is not sufficient. But we can and should do more. This Assembly must step up and call on the Executive to put in place an immediate moratorium on all onshore petroleum licensing. Legislation must be brought forward to ban all exploration for, drilling for and extraction of hydrocarbons in Northern Ireland. Here in the North, as across the world, our young people are demanding a climate reset. Accepting this motion will let our young people know that we're listening to them, that we're committed to a greener, cleaner future for them and for all. I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mrs Rosemary Barton.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to participate in this debate this afternoon as a person who lives, I believe, in one of the most beautiful constituencies of Northern Ireland, part of which, County Fermanagh, has been under threat for some time in relation to the exploitation of gas by the fracking method, which had the potential to destroy both the health of the people and the beauty and the economy of the area if a licence had been granted. As the United Kingdom is committed through its Climate Change Act and Paris Agreement to limit its warming to below 2 degrees and aiming for 0 by 2050, we in Northern Ireland over these past few years have made a concerted effort to support this Act, to look at alternative sources of providing energy and encouraging the use of sustainable materials, with a shift away from, for example, our one-use plastics. Therefore, I see the motion today as extremely important. We must continue our work towards protecting our environment, but even more important, protecting public health. In doing so, we must reject anything that would negate our efforts so far towards improving our environment and destroying our air and water quality, which would have a profound effect on our health. Presently, while the Minister for Economy has confirmed in an answer to a written question from me that there is no active petroleum licences in Northern Ireland for exploitation, drilling and extraction, it gives no guarantees that in the near future there may be applications for such a licence, or even applications already waiting to be processed. If a licence was granted, it entitles the holder to undertake exploitation, drilling and extraction processes subject to the regulatory permissions for a period of not 1 year, but up to 30 years. Yes, there is an expectation that licence holders should review the potential of resources when evaluating the overall prospect of their licence. And who is going to check this? The argument about the economy suffering if a moratorium was granted on these petroleum licences does not hold. In Fermanagh, which is some of the most beautiful areas of karst scenery, it would be totally destroyed. At present, our tourist industry flourishes in parallel with our agricultural industry and the limited manufacturing companies in the area. All of these combine to retain our natural countryside in the county and collectively all contribute to the economy of the county. It has been well documented over the years the damage to health this extraction can cause, from the different lung problems because of the unclean air, through to a number of medical problems associated with drinking the contaminated water. At the moment, we all know the importance of good health and sacrifices we make to stay healthy and protect ourselves. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask that further consideration and thought is given to the consequences of granting permission for petroleum licences, the health of those living near prospective drilling sites for petroleum exploration and production cannot and must not be sacrificed for the sake of our economy. We will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. I call Mr. John Blair.
Principal Deputy Speaker, thank you. I firstly want to welcome Minister Mallon's recent plans to extend the planning permission requirement to cover exploration for oil and gas, including via fracking, a welcome announcement and, in my opinion, a critical step towards the cessation of petroleum exploration and the detrimental associated environmental impacts it causes. Like the proposer of the motion, Principal Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to thank the campaigners on these issues who have kept us informed and involved. Speaking on behalf of Alliance, Principal Deputy Speaker, I have to say we're at a crucial juncture. The decisions we make today and the actions we take will determine whether we succeed or fail at preventing the worst impacts of climate change and further devastation brought by that. Scientific assessments of the carbon contained in existing fossil fuel reserves suggest that full exploitation of these resources is incompatible with the agreed target of no more than 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. The unrestricted extraction of these reserves and continuing to issue petroleum licence in Northern Ireland or elsewhere for that matter undermines attempts to limit greenhouse gas emissions and would be counter to these imperatives. By ceasing to issue petroleum licences in Northern Ireland, we can contribute towards our climate change obligations and prevent any further damage or risks associated with drilling exploration wells, unconventional hydrocarbon exploration and, of course, fracking also. The big picture is climate change, but fracking is not only harmful to our climate, these environmental concerns also risk detrimental health issues. There is growing evidence of a variety of health problems being associated with air pollution and water pollution caused by fracking. Multiple public health risks have emerged in research associated with petroleum exploration and production, including increases in certain cancers, asthmatic conditions, neurological problems and low birth weight amongst those living in communities neighbouring drill sites. These are issues which, at the very least, deserve further exploration, examination and, of course, a moratorium. The correlation is simply too strong to ignore, especially when we have other cleaner and renewable energy options easily available to us. For our safety and that of future generations, we should not allow this new administration in this Assembly, Principal Deputy Speaker, to sell off public lands nor allow drilling on our island, and we should, I believe, ban fracking completely. We urgently need to legislate for the cessation of petroleum licensing for exploration and extraction, and until that can happen, it is imperative that a moratorium on fracking should be imposed. Today, we can join counterparts in the UK and Ireland in calling for a date for a moratorium on the exploration and development of new reserves, promote the widespread rollout of renewable energy, decrease the consumption of fossil fuels, and mitigate the devastating impacts of climate change. If we mean the recently publicly expressed sentiment and intent with regard to building back better and green recovery, then we cannot, in any convincing or sincere way, also be realistically talking about further fossil fuel exploration. Green recovery requires 21st century solutions to modern day needs. I support and urge others to support the motion.
Mr. Sean Lynch.
Last can call you. And as the third Fermanagh person to speak on this debate, I welcome the debate and support the motion. Never before has the issue of climate change and the issue of fossil fuels been so crucial. In a recent documentary, and many people may have heard this, David Attenborough said, "The time for action is now. Unless we act, we may reach the point of no recovery." We have all seen the huge flooding and fires across the globe in recent times. Last week it was confirmed that September gone by was the warmest in globe recent records, 0.05 degrees hotter than last September. Scientists say it's a clear indication of the temperatures being driven by emissions for human activity. The motion outlines the ban on fracking in the south of Ireland. This was passed into law 2 years ago and was welcomed by communities across the country where fracking had been mooted, including counties surrounding my own native Fermanagh, such as Cavan, Leitrim and Donegal. As we know, fracking is a controversial method of extracting shale gas in which chemicals, water and sand are released at high pressure into the rock to break it up and release the gas. This practice has been linked to various environmental damaging outcomes, including air and water pollution, soil contamination and even earthquakes. A 5-year study published by Ireland's Environmental Protection Agency recently in 2017 found fracking has the potential to damage the environment and human health. Sinn Féin's aim is to phase out fossil fuels and create a greener and more self-sufficient island when it comes to energy. A ban on fracking in the south, while continuing a policy in the north, would not stand to any sense, particularly in Fermanagh, where fracking has been a huge issue mentioned by a number of people in the past number of years. The region has the same rock formation and water sources that reaches down through Cavan and Leitrim and flows also down as far as the Shannon estuary. The region is also of immense natural beauty. It forms part of a geopark recognised by UNESCO, includes Cavan Bourne Park, the River Shannon Pot, the world-famous Marble Arch Caves, and now the popular Culture Walk, better known to people today as the Stairway to Heaven. If fracking were to be allowed here, as well as dangers previously outlined, it would impact massively, as others have said, on the agriculture and tourism of the area. Never before has there been a greater need to dramatically decrease carbon emissions to prevent climate breakdown and further intensification of the climate crisis we are currently experiencing. If that means large quantities of fossil fuels remaining in the ground, so be it. Given the declaration of a climate change emergency by this Assembly recently, I have initiated a private member's bill to ban fracking. The bill purpose and policy objective is to halt the issuing of any further licensing from the Minister of Economy for the exploration, extraction and production of fuels extracted by hydraulic fracturing. The PMB will go out to consultation in the near future, and I hope to secure as much support as possible across this chamber. I look forward to engaging with the stakeholders who have been campaigning on this issue for years. The Department of Economy now issue these licences. As of February 2020, 2 applications are currently being considered, covering the areas around Lough Neagh Basin and almost the entire county of Fermanagh. In a recent response to Kiva Archibald, my colleague, Minister Dodds, rejected calls for a moratorium on petroleum licence because there was no legislative scope for this. There is therefore a need for legislation in this regard. The Minister has advocated another review and further research into operations and impact of these licences. The climate science is very clear, as is international scientific opinion on the impact of further exploration and extraction of fossil fuels. Other countries have already acted to ban fracking. We are not only in a climate crisis, but also a climate countdown, and we have little time to lose.
I call Ms Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy, or Principal Deputy Speaker. Well, I would first like to pay tribute to the multitude of environmental campaigners whose drive and determination has pushed this issue to the fore. I recently met with the Stop the Drill campaigners, and I share their concerns that fracking is a danger to the climate, to the environment and to public health. I am proud of the SDLP's strong record on this issue. As Environment Minister, my party colleague Mark H. Durkan introduced a moratorium on fracking until scientific evidence demonstrates that it can be carried out safely without risk to the environment or to public health. No such evidence exists. Instead, we have a wealth of evidence that serves as a stark warning to the dangers of fracking poses. Back in 2011, we saw how fracking in Blackpool caused 2 separate earthquakes. Further from home, we have observed confirmed cases of drinking water contamination from fracking in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia and Texas. Research has also linked air pollution from fracking to a long list of health issues ranging from respiratory illness and central nervous system damage to birth defects, cancer and premature death. Not only that, one of the main pollutants released in the fracking process is methane, a major greenhouse gas. Over 100 years, methane has heat-trapping power about 30 times greater than CO2. No wonder methane has been dubbed CO2 on steroids. So the evidence is clear. The damage caused to our environment and our communities would be irreversible. I am pleased that Infrastructure Minister Nicola Mallon's new plans to remove permitted development rights for oil and gas will place more power into the hands of those communities, ensuring that they have the right to participate in any planning decisions regarding future petroleum exploration. As this Assembly can and must go further by introducing legislation that bans all exploration for drilling for and extraction of hydrocarbons in Northern Ireland. Now is the time to accelerate the growth of our renewable sector and build a more affordable, clean and secure future energy that creates a legacy of well-paid jobs. The North is well placed to harness the potential of hydro, wave and tidal energy resources. Instead, the Department of Economy has decided to waste £75,000 of taxpayers' money on a research project into the potential economic, societal and environmental impacts of onshore petroleum exploration and production of unconventional oil and gas. And let's be fair, the Department has a proven track record of wasting millions of pounds of taxpayers' money in the energy sector. Given the environmental challenges we are facing, it is surely crystal clear by now that we must move away from our dependence on fossil fuels. We do not need to spend thousands of money to find that out. I support the motion.
Mr Stuart Dixon.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker. I also rise to support the motion and commend Ms Woods and my Alliance colleagues for bringing it to the Chamber today. Speaker, a few years ago, the people of Carrickfergus in my East Antrim constituency faced the prospect of oil exploration at Woodburn Forest in the hills above the town. Local opposition was particularly strong. However, exploration went ahead. Perhaps one of the biggest issues in Carrickfergus area, supported by many environmental activists. The key concern was how it was so close to the site of the Woodburn reservoirs and the potential for contamination of drinking water to the Greater Belfast area. We unfortunately have a similar threat to our environment in East Antrim at the moment, with an application to store gas under Larne Lough. Of course, there were multitudes of assurances given at the time, but as we've seen in other countries where companies provide these assurances, the reality is very different. Because ultimately, it's money, not the local community, that drives the business. Fortuitously for the town and for Northern Ireland, no oil or gas was discovered and the prospectors left. But thousands of trees that they planted as a planning requirement to restore the area, what happened to them? They've subsequently died, leaving the area barren. Furthermore, if oil was found, I have no doubt that a full application for drilling would have been made and putting the local environment in peril. It's for that reason, and many others, that I welcome the Infrastructure Minister's announcement that exploration will now also be subject to planning permission, putting a check at the very start of the process, because the public need to have confidence that a strict process is in place. Some people, Mr Speaker, seem to be under the impression that oil exploration would flood Northern Ireland with investments and wealth. Well, just like the TV show Dallas, and I'm sure our Minister of the Economy would not wish to be portrayed as a J.R. Ewing or Sue Ellen. But I think that that's a very dated perception. Fossil fuels have had their day, and they are the fuels of the past. The Economy Minister is currently working on an energy strategy, and she's indicated that she would expect a figure of at least 70% plus of our electricity to be renewably generated. What I believe has precipitated this debate is a move by the Economy Minister to commission research into the economic, societal and environmental impacts of onshore petroleum exploration and production in Northern Ireland. Many of us in this chamber will have been contacted by concerned and distressed residents in County Fermanagh. This is a precursor to proceeding with, as many believe, this is a precursor to proceeding with fracking in the area by producing research that promotes exploration and may make it more difficult to turn down future applications. I think, Mr Speaker, the Minister, regardless of her research, needs to stop on this. Look properly at what the implications there are and could be, and how she can ensure that we do not see fracking or petroleum exploration in County Fermanagh. We have a ban or moratorium in all other parts of the British Isles. England tried to promote this practice, but shale gas exploration led to earthquakes, amongst other concerns. It's important that we draw this to a close now, banning the practice altogether. The risks are too high for any potential benefits, not least as we move towards a post-fossil fuel era. The Minister did inform us yesterday, and I take some hope from this, that the system for licensing is old and that a greener, cleaner, more sustainable economy is what she wants for Northern Ireland. It's what I believe we all want for Northern Ireland. The Minister is right. This is the way forward. So let us leave these fossil fuels in the ground. The future will only be bright if it's green and clean. Our energy sources will likely need to be different, involving clean generation, and I would like to hear more of other initiatives that the Department is taking with regards to these, specifically hydrogen, as I believe there was a bid to the Executive in respect of this. So I hope that the Minister today can outline how we can ban fracking and petroleum exploration, put it behind us forever, and can market Northern Ireland as a green energy leader for a better, cleaner future and to assist with our economic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Members will know the time that has been allocated for this debate. There are 2 more members and I have 9 minutes. So if the first member that I'm going to call is generous, then the final member, Mr Carroll, will also be able to get in, but it's up to Mr Aiken if he wishes to be generous or not. I call Mr Steve Aiken.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker, and of course I shall be generous. I shall try and keep my remarks to about 3 minutes to let Jerry in, and I think in the spirit of cooperation I think that's something we should do. Look, I rise to support this motion, and I rise to support this motion for a very clear reason. Is that in Northern Ireland we do not wish to have hydrocarbon drilling, either for gas fracking or for petroleum. And the reason for that is quite simple. It's because now we are moving away from the hydrocarbon era and we're moving into the era of renewables and smart grids and the appropriate use of new technologies to be able to provide energy for Northern Ireland. And bearing in mind that is the case, and I wish to keep myself short, I would like to move on to the specific questions about what we need, rather than saying any proposals to be doing drilling for oil and gas in Northern Ireland, but is what we need to do around a new energy strategy. And the importance within that strategy is about some of the things we need to look to. The first one is we need to see the implication on the installation of new smart grids. We need to have studies into the feasibility of offshore wind and how that can mix into the wider all islands and indeed pan-European energy market to do that as well. I welcome the Minister's commitment to hydrogen, and I think particularly for our farmers who are looking to the future, I think it's important that we look to the importance of biogas and the use of hydrogen. And indeed, one of the things we should be considering is whether our utility regulator is actually fit for purpose, so that we're actually allowed to inject hydrogen and biogas directly into the grid to allow us to do that as well. The other area we do need to do is we need to investigate what is in fact the monopoly of ESB and EirGrid, or better known in Northern Ireland as NIE and Sony, and the implications that has for the Northern Ireland energy market, particularly how that affects and distorts pricing, and the impact of people trying to get renewables onto the grid and be able to do that as well. And she'll be well aware from her predecessor, who introduced this monopoly system, that this is something that needs to be fundamentally reviewed. But we also need to consider something else. We need to consider whether indeed we have a system that's fit for purpose, that is capable of dealing with future energy policy in Northern Ireland. And I think the key here we have to consider is whether Northern Ireland is too small to have its own regulation system. And one of the keys to future renewable energy issues is going to be around contracts for difference, and the importance of whether we go on an all United Kingdom system using Ofgem, or we look to another system, and rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, and every time we do that we seem to get it badly wrong, whether it's in wind, whether it's in RHI boilers, or indeed whether it's trying to build incineration to power plants which aren't needed in my constituency. So, I am now about to sit down. I am now to give some more time to Jerry Carroll, but I would like the Minister to address those. But, Mr Deputy Principal Speaker, we support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you for pointing out the time shortages, and thank Mr Aiken for being generous with his time. But I have to say, it would have been absurd. You know, I signed the original motion, and if I wasn't called then, I think that it raises all sorts of questions about how this House operates. But I thank both for mentioning. I think Ms Sugden is looking to get in and isn't being called maybe as well, no, so I think there's issues there as well. But thank you. Several months ago, Mr Speaker, this House declared a climate emergency, which was an important step on the path to hopefully tackle the existential climate and biodiversity issues which threaten life itself, obviously, on this planet. And of course, with many things with many things, just because something is debated, discussed and voted on doesn't automatically make it a reality. And repeatedly in this House we hear from members and ministers that we shouldn't be working in silos and there should be a joined-up approach to tackling a range of issues. However, I firmly believe that the Department either hasn't got the memo or maybe wants to ignore it. Because on the one hand, we have an overwhelming desire for action in our communities to tackle the climate issues. This House obviously given its endorsement to that approach. And then the Minister or the Department or both going off in the opposite direction and potentially implementing or allowing policies to exist that would damage the environment. And this is not only a contradiction in what this House said and how it voted, but it represents a real slap in the face to all those who walked out of school, who walked out of their workplaces as part of the climate strikes, and all those community campaigners, as mentioned already by others, fighting to protect the environment. It's very worrying, therefore, Mr Speaker, that the Department could be, if not already is, embarking on a path that could see the validation of further licence applications. Further, it appears to me, Mr Speaker, that the Department has validated an application to a company with the worrying financial irregularities and concerns in relation to the application in Fermanagh. As I understand it, an application by a $2 company in the Isle of Man is validated, while even after the validation, the Isle of Man authorities refused to reveal the ultimate beneficial owners of this company. But still, a licence to explore was granted. And as I understand it, the Department tried to check with the Isle of Man authorities, like I said, who the beneficial owners were, only after the application was validated, and by doing so broke several regulations, I think 87 and 2010 regulations. And so that's very, very concerning. And it's a bit like a bank giving a mortgage to somebody without looking at their bank statements. It wouldn't happen then. And why should it happen on a much bigger, dangerous scale? Why should corporations be allowed to act with such immunity and little scrutiny over their decisions and transactions? And if this licence proceeds, it seems to me we will have another expensive inquiry potentially into a flawed, potentially dangerous system detrimental to the environment. And why not stop it from happening now? So I think lessons we were told were learned through RHI, but to me that doesn't seem to be the case. To me this smacks of transitioning from cash to ash to cash for gas. So I think these issues need addressed. And much like when RHI whistleblowers were dismissed, concerns brushed under the carpet, there are massive questions for the Minister here. I appreciate she may not know this information, but I think it's important that she responds to it today, and if not today, then as quickly as possible, because these are concerns of huge public interest. I think also, Mr Deputy Speaker, the problems don't seem to end there, because in my constituency and in others, there's an application, PELA 116, which extends from Lough Neagh area right across to West Belfast, across multiple councils in the north, which allowed for potential drilling and extraction. And it's worth saying that alongside members of my own community and others, I think in this House and beyond, thousands of responses of objections were submitted around this application, but yet we haven't heard a decision from the Department. And I think it's worth saying and emphasising to the Minister, whilst we're waiting over a year for a response on this, nothing would be nothing less than binning this application would be agreeable to my constituents and I'm sure many others. So I think it is very concerning, Mr Speaker. General terms, there's a mistaken view that granting licences of various kinds may bring jobs or some economic benefit to beleaguered communities. That licence may be granted to multinational corporations and mass polluters. We need to have a wide-ranging and imaginative campaign to create green jobs as part of a just transition, and this is even more essential given the hundreds of thousands of jobs that will, people that will lose their jobs from COVID and the recession. And rather
I'm
than
afraid
let those...
the member's time is up.
So I'll bring my comments to a close, and I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I call the Minister for the Economy to respond. Mrs Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to respond to this motion and value the interest shown by members in this very important and current issue. And I wish to begin by providing some context around the current arrangements for petroleum licensing in Northern Ireland. Onshore exploration for petroleum in Northern Ireland has been taking place on small scales since the Petroleum Production Act Northern Ireland was introduced in 1964. Over that time, although small amounts of oil and gas have been found, no commercial extraction has taken place. There are currently no petroleum licences in Northern Ireland. The last one, held by Terrain Energy, was relinquished on the 28th of April 2020. This House will of course be aware that my department is currently considering 2 petroleum licensing applications, and I will talk about these in more detail later. In the past, having economic security of an indigenous oil or gas supply would have been welcome. My department and its predecessors would have been strong advocates for the exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels. However, in recent years there has been a step change. Genuine and proven concerns about carbon emissions, global warming, and the environmental impacts of petroleum extraction and use are setting a new policy context. And indeed, many in this chamber today have recognised that evolving policy context with references to the changes in policy in the other nations of the United Kingdom. In recognition of this clear change, not only in policy objectives, but also in public opinion, and even before the New Decade New Approach commitment of tackling climate change head-on, a review of our approach to petroleum exploration and exploitation was needed. On this basis, my department commenced a wide-ranging review in 2019. Now, I wish for a moment or two to return to the 2 petroleum licence applications which are currently being considered. Sorry, excuse me. One applicant proposes exploring for oil and gas in the porous sandstones in the area to the southeast of Lough Neagh, using conventional drilling techniques. The other applicant proposes exploring for gas in County Fermanagh, and initially proposed the use of high-volume hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. Both applications were subject to a public consultation process, which closed in July 2019. My department received in excess of 5,700 responses, which were published online at the end of October last year. Following its own review of the responses received, one of the applicant companies, Tamboran Resources UK Limited, made a request to the department to revise its application. The proposed revision will remove the need for fracking, very much a direct result of the strength of opposition to this controversial technique highlighted by the respondents to the consultation process. Therefore, in summary, across Northern Ireland at this point in time, we have no petroleum exploration and development licences in place, and neither of the 2 applications currently being considered currently propose the application of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. The extraordinary and unprecedented number of responses to the public consultation on petroleum licensing applications is a clear sign of the change in public attitudes and demonstrates the concerns that currently exist around petroleum exploration. I recognise the very legitimate ease that has been raised through the consultation process and indeed by members of this House directly to me. My department is currently considering these issues, will do so in conjunction with relevant experts across government and other regulatory bodies as required. However, the number and range of concerns raised in the responses to the consultation has simply underlined the lack of knowledge and evidence we have around these issues. It has also brought into sharp focus the urgent need to review and update our petroleum licensing policy and regime to meet the needs of Northern Ireland going forward. I have previously made it quite clear that a review of the licensing policy in this area must be completed before any decision on the 2 current applications can be taken. Furthermore, I have also given a commitment that given the cross-cutting and controversial nature of petroleum exploration and development, it will be for the Executive to make the final decision on what our future petroleum licensing policy will be. As I have already indicated, my department has commenced a wide-ranging review of our petroleum licensing regime. This review is being undertaken in accordance with the Executive's Policy Development Toolkit, with the aim of establishing a robust evidence base from which to develop policy options for any future petroleum licensing regime. Work began in February 2019 with a high-level review of the existing regime to assess its effectiveness and impact on sustainability, particularly in light of the UK's net zero carbon commitments. This included engagements with counterpoints in Scotland and Wales. The outputs of the review only highlighted further the deficiency of existing information on the Northern Ireland specific impacts of petroleum licensing. Taken in conjunction with the number and range of issues raised in the consultation on the two applications, the review also identified a need for independent research into the economic, societal and environmental impacts of onshore petroleum exploration and development in Northern Ireland. This research is designed to help inform the evidence on which we can base our future petroleum licensing policy. My department is working through the final stages of the procurement exercise and intends to award the contract for this project in the coming days. There has been much speculation, I would have to say, in this House this afternoon, and many have referred to policy developments in England, Scotland and Wales. One thing that England, Scotland and Wales have in common in this area of policy development is that they all carried out that independent research before coming to that policy decision, just as Northern Ireland will and should. Once the independent research is completed, the review will move into a period of intensive stakeholder engagement with a view to developing evidence-based petroleum licensing policy proposals. As and when necessary, any new policy proposal will be subject to full environmental and regulatory impact assessment, including strategic environmental assessment. After any proposals for a future policy have been fully developed and assessed, it will then be taken forward to public consultation. Ultimately, the final decision on the future petroleum licensing policy for Northern Ireland will then be taken to the Executive prior to the draft legislation coming before this House. That is my commitment to this House today. Members will also be aware that my department is developing a new energy strategy with consumers, businesses and domestic users central to all of the themes of work. Many have referenced it, and I look forward to engaging with you on this. And indeed, I noted the issues that you specifically addressed, Mr. Aiken, and I will write to you on those very specific issues. The new strategy will set out a roadmap to 2050 to decarbonise heat, power and transport and substantially improve our energy efficiency and benefit energy consumers. The review of petroleum licensing policy will therefore need to take account of the policy direction in the energy strategy. And I thank Mr Dixon this afternoon for reminding the House that I have said very clearly that Northern Ireland needs not just economic recovery, but a green economic recovery, sustainable environmental policies that can be part of that new economy of Northern Ireland's second century. I understand that this motion has wide support across this chamber and that petroleum development is a very emotive subject. As Minister, I want to ensure that any decision I recommend to the Executive on the future policy is based on robust evidence and presents the best way forward for Northern Ireland as a whole. At this stage, I cannot support the motion as presented. I have taken legal advice on the matter and have been advised that the course of action proposed in the motion would most likely be subject to challenge. Accordingly, I am of the view that the appropriate way forward is to undertake the Northern Ireland specific research, which my department is in the process of procuring. As Minister with responsibility for this area, I am asking for the time and space to allow officials to develop evidence-based policy proposals that will be subject to a rigorous policy development process. I will then ask the Executive to take a fully informed decision. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, may I thank members for their contributions to today's debate and assure all in this House that I and my department remain committed to working with all key stakeholders to ensure that we continue to deliver key programme for government outcomes and climate change commitments in Northern Ireland. I have set out my department's direction of travel, which will result in this Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive being able to deliver an evidence-based petroleum licensing policy for Northern Ireland for the benefit of all our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And I now call on Mr Philip McGuigan to wind on the debate, and you will have 10 minutes.
And can I firstly begin by thanking those groups who have campaigned tirelessly on this issue and who will continue, no doubt, to make sure that the issue is kept high on the agenda until successfully resolved. As a co-signature of the motion, I want to thank all the other members who signed it, and in particular Rachel Woods, who opened today's debate. If perhaps the subject matter of the debate, hydraulic fracturing, petroleum licensing, hydrocarbon extraction, can be a little complicated, the politics of the subject is conversely simple. If there was ever a time when extracting our energy sources from underground was appropriate, that time has long since passed. This Assembly, in one of its first debates upon resumption after the New Decade New Approach Agreement, demonstrated that with regards to the environment, it certainly wanted to take a new approach by declaring a climate emergency. It then followed up with a debate that signalled that the majority of MLAs also wanted to see a Climate Act legislated for here in the North to help protect our environment. It is clear from those debates, and indeed from the one today, that the majority of political parties and MLAs want to see this chamber being the source of progressive environmental legislation that not only looks to the future but helps protect the future. In that scenario, we need to keep Ireland's fossil fuels in the ground and spend our time and energy researching, developing and promoting clean, renewable forms of energy. There is no wisdom investing in fossil fuels from either a climate commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions or either from an economic perspective. In my view, Minister, the Department for Economy needs to stop wasting time with its review on petroleum licensing, as the motion asks, immediately issue a moratorium on licensing until legislation can be brought forward that totally bans the practice of extraction. There are, as has been pointed out, currently no petroleum licensing in place in the North, so the time couldn't be better to cease the practice. This motion is obviously about more than just fracking, but I think it's important, as others have done, to point out the dangers of fracking. Whether it is methane pollution and its impact on climate change, the pollution of air and water, workers and communities being exposed to toxic chemicals, soil contamination, all of which can lead to an increase in certain types of cancer, asthma, migraines, skin disorders, and add risk to pregnancies, the risk of fracking are endless. Yes?
Would the member agree with me that the recurring issue of fracking and these processes hangs like a sword of Damocles over communities in relation to health and safety and well-being, and that actually what is needed to deal with this issue is legislation?
Yeah, I thank the member for the intervention, and I do agree. I mean, I suspect communities of Fermanagh and along the north coast will have listened to the Minister and been disappointed that she hasn't added certainty to the subject today when given the chance. I mean, it's not difficult to see why local communities, whether they be in Fermanagh, the north coast, in my own constituency at Ballinlay, or close to Woodburn Forest in County Antrim, have come together to resist the potential harm to their communities, their environment and their locality. This motion is also about the risks to be associated with drilling exploratory wells, even when hydraulic fracturing is not initially being undertaken. These risks expand and become cumulative if exploration becomes commercial and extraction using multiple wells. It is the licensing that opens the gates to all the harmful potential and risks. So we need to close the door now so that companies don't come along and use other technologies such as acidization or use coal seam gas production. We currently have a system that allows for development by stealth. The only way to ensure this doesn't happen and communities can breathe the sigh of relief, as my party colleague has pointed out, is by banning the practice and banning the issue of licences. It is time that we moved away from fossil fuel dependency. Countries all over the world are taking action on banning fracking. On these islands, in the south, Scotland, England and Wales, there is either a ban or a moratorium. As we move beyond the current pandemic to building a future, it must be based on certainty, sustainability and based on green growth. For that certainty, we need to rule out past practices that are no longer beneficial to us. That means implementing the tenets of this motion. And throughout the debate, I think there were 11 speakers, 12 and 13, including myself and the Minister, and all spoke against the practices of fracking. Rachel Woods, who brought the motion, talked about the importance of moving towards renewable energy from an environmental as well as an economic argument, and clearly pointed out the dangers and the impact of fracking. Gary Middleton spoke about all the strategies and policies that are taking place within various departments moving forward with regard to energy. But there's a bit of a dichotomy where some departments are moving forward on a progressive approach, but we still have this issue hanging over our heads that needs dealt with. Gemma Dolan, my party colleague and the first of the Fermanagh contingent to speak, spoke about the impact on her local constituents and the fear and worry that many in Fermanagh have about this, and the local opposition and the reasons why there is this local opposition in terms of the damage to the local community and countryside. Patsy McGlone talked about this being an opportunity to say that within this Assembly the environmental issues are no longer second-class issues. Rosemary Barton, also from Fermanagh, talked about the beauty of that constituency and county and the impact that fracking would have if allowed to go ahead. John Blair welcomed Nicola Mallon's recent announcement on permitted development on oil and gas, and that in some way details how in some departments there is positive moves, but in others less so. Sean Lynch, again from Fermanagh, addressed the impact locally. He talked about how this impacts on climate change and the all-Ireland impact of having two policies on this island that interact, particularly given the proximity of Fermanagh on the border. He also talked about his own private member's bill, which he intends to launch for consultation very shortly, which would ban the practice of fracking. Sinead McLaughlin commended her party colleague, Mark Higgs-Durkin, who introduced the moratorium in 2015. Stuart Dixon talked about the experience of his own constituents of oil exploration in Woodburn and the concerns and the opposition there and the impact on the area. Steve Aiken, again supporting the motion, talked about, again, like everybody else, how we need to move away towards renewable energies. He talked about offshore wind, smart grid, hydrogen, biogas. He said that the north was too small an area for regulation, and although he didn't say it, but I think he meant that we needed an all-Ireland approach to such an issue, along with all other issues. Jerry Carroll again put today's debate in the context of a climate emergency and talked about, again, as I have done, some good work, but all the talking actually needs action to make it a reality. He talked about the impact on the public and the support from the public with regard to school children or community groups and environmental groups all trying to protect the environment. And he mentioned concerns he has about the current licensing process. The Minister put the debate in the context. He talked about the current legislation being in place from 1964, and in that period there actually has been no commercial extraction taking place. Well, if that doesn't send a signal that we don't need the legislation, then I don't know. She said her department has recognised that we need a step change with over recent years in terms of policy objectives, and that should match public opinion. She went on to talk about the review within her department and the 2 current applications. She stated that 5,700 responses were received. She didn't give the details, but I would imagine a lot of them were opposed to the practices, and as a result, Tamboran, one of the applicants, removed the need for fracking. But, as I have said, this debate goes much further than just fracking. It is the issue of petroleum licensing that we need to see ceased. So she said that her department is currently considering the issues and gave reasons why she felt she can't come forward in the current time. And just in terms of concluding, the motion, as I said, does go beyond fracking. We don't, in my view, need a review of petroleum licensing policy. We need legislation to stop it. And I hope that the Minister does take note of the strength of feeling of the political parties and the individual MLAs who have spoke today and actions that strength of support of today's motion into legislation in the near future.
Thank you. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. I think the ayes have it.